Communism.
Tensions.
Embargo.
Batista government.
Since 1959, how has the Cuban government caused a crisis within the nation, and how can it be resolved?
From 1959 to the present, Cuban political restrictions have revoked human rights and caused extreme poverty within the nation. This can be solved through the civilians and military personnel coming together to overthrow the abusive dictatorship.
The economy in Cuba is state-controlled, and by state-controlled, we mean that most production is controlled by the state, and most of the labor force is also controlled or employed by the state. Free education and healthcare, universal employment and benefits, food, housing, and entertainment at low costs.
The glamorous sound of these advantages seemed to strike a positive note, but despite these benefits, from 1990 to 1994, Cuba was in an economic crisis where over 1/3 of its people were in poverty.
The major reason for this was the loss of Soviet subsidies, but underlying reasons are usually identified as the U.S. embargo on Cuba, Cuba's increasing participation in the black market, corruption in the government, and the like. An embargo is a government-imposed trade barrier. This applies to the United States and Cuba, in that the United States once created an embargo upon Cuba during the Cold War, and then further strengthened it through the Helms-Burton Act. This embargo continues to exist, but Obama has been creating multiple exceptions and loosening certain restrictions in order to expand markets.
Just in! I've just received news that 7 of the 31 councils of state have gone missing. The last reported sighting was 4 days ago, and the prospects are not looking bright for these government officials. Although no evidence is available at the moment, most Cubans seem to be convinced it was Fidel Castro's doing. Here's the wife of Antonio Garcia, one of the missing.
It was him, Castro. Last weekend, Antonio and the 6 other council members were talking about him over dinner. They were just having fun, joking around about his policies and how soon we would not be able to walk out of our houses without soldiers breathing down our backs, just waiting for us to read a forbidden book or utter one word of faint opposition to the beloved Fidel Castro.
So there you have it. Many Cubans don't put it past Castro to commit such an act of kidnapping and possibly murder. After all, communism is the only party tolerated under his rule. His refusal to negotiate with other countries show his blatant disregard for the acceptable and fair means of government rule. Where this will leave Cubans, we have yet to discover.
From the government come restrictions on freedom of speech, thought, expression, and press. Movies are filtered or prevented from ever being released in the nation. Private libraries are outlawed, and any librarians are jailed because of the censorship of books. People in poverty cover the streets. These people are also surrounded by political propaganda, the mosquitoes thriving in the dirty water, and intimidating tanks and soldiers. The Generation Y blog by Ioannis Sanchez was written to inform people of what Cuba is really like. Sanchez was later on summoned and threatened by government officials, claiming that she had transgressed all limits of tolerance with your rapprochement and contacts with counter-revolutionary elements. Counter-revolutionaries, in this case, refer to those who oppose the Cuban government policies.
The Cuban government has already made it clear that they not only are intent on keeping power and denying human rights. The chance of the Cuban government deciding to give the Cuban people the freedoms they deserve is slim. Barring an international incident, the military's technological power would make most purely civilian rebellions doomed to fail.
The most effective and most likely resolution to the Cuban government's abuse of its citizens' rights would be a rebellion that included military officers. If members of the military rebelled in tandem with the civilian population, the weaponry gap between the government and the resistance would diminish, and a civilian rebellion would be feasible.
Such a rebellion could result in a more open and democratic government and the return of the Cuban people's human rights.